Have you ever considered the sheer number of times you've lost your inner peace reacting to something that, deep down, didn't deserve your attention? Have you ever felt like a puppet, its strings pulled by the words and actions of others? Carl Jung, with his profound and sensitive understanding of the human soul, once suggested that true emotional freedom begins the moment we choose not to react, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. And maybe you don't know it yet, but when you embrace the power of non-reaction, something in your life transforms forever. This video is an invitation, a whisper of freedom, a profound promise. If you listen until the end and absorb what is said, you'll never again be swept away by the emotional storms of others. You will finally begin to experience the serene tranquility of those who command their inner world. We aren't talking about ignoring reality. We are speaking of something far more powerful, reshaping how you exist within it. And to begin this journey, I need you to be honest with yourself. How many times, just in the last few days, has your peace been disrupted by a message, a sidelong glance, a spiteful comment, or even what you imagined others were thinking about you? You feel deeply. That's why you're here, and that's why this conversation will touch places you may have hidden even from yourself. Our daily lives have become emotional minefields. Careless words, cold stares, veiled criticisms, and you, like a sensitive sponge, absorb it all. At work, when your boss doesn't acknowledge your efforts. At home, when a relative says something unfair. On social media, when someone types a few words filled with judgment. Every slight becomes a pain, every interaction a tension, and before you realize it, your soul is depleted. But what if I told you that it could end? What if Carl Jung was right, arguing that we are hurt not so much by others, but by how we react to them? What if the world doesn't need as much change as we do in learning not to give our power away to the world? Jung understood an invisible truth. To react automatically is to be in captivity. It means living as a reflection, not as an essence. It means being controlled by external stimuli, like an emotional puppet. And when you finally start practicing the power of non-reaction, something magical, yet profoundly real, happens. You stop being moved by others and start moving yourself. But be warned, not reacting, the way we are discussing it here, is not indifference. It's an art. It's presence. It's emotional maturity. It's when you see, hear, understand, and yet maintain your peace. It's when you smile on the inside. When someone tries to throw you off balance, and you simply don't react. It's like being a lake that remains calm, even when stones are thrown into it. Most people will never learn this. They will live like emotional time bombs, exploding at any provocation, defending against everything, always responding, and losing energy, peace, and purpose. But you are here, and that already puts you on a different path. And maybe right now you're thinking, but how can I not react if people constantly test me? It's a legitimate question, because the modern world stimulates the opposite. It wants you to be heated. It wants you to voice your opinion about everything. It wants you to respond quickly, argue fiercely, speak louder. It wants you to lose your peace, because when you lose your peace, you consume more. You become more frustrated. You become more dependent. And the industry of chaos wins. But you can escape it. And you can start right now with a single choice. Imagine for a moment the following situation. Before you stands a person who always knows how to anger you. A family member, a co-worker, a friend on social media. This person does what they always do, teases, provokes, says something petty, and you don't react. You don't answer. You don't roll your eyes. You don't justify yourself. You don't explain. You simply observe, quietly, calmly, and in that moment, something changes. Not the other person, but you. The power that person had over you vanishes. The tension dissipates. The usual cycle, attack, response, resentment, breaks. And you feel a new power, almost invisible, but absolutely real. This is the beginning of freedom. Jung believed that much of our emotional suffering is born from the illusion that we must react to everything. He said that when we cease to obey impulses, we begin to come into contact with what he called the center of the self, a place of profound consciousness where the soul rests and observes without getting lost. And you can reach that place. But to do so, you must give something up. You must relinquish the constant desire to be right, to win arguments, to constantly prove your worth. Reacting is often just another way of shouting, "Look at me, I'm valuable." But when you know your worth, you don't need to shout. Your calm speaks for you. Perhaps at this moment, you are remembering situations where you lost control, when you regretted answering criticism, when you hurt yourself trying to defend yourself, when you went to bed with a heavy heart because of something you were told. This is human. It is understandable. But it doesn't have to be this way forever. You need to understand and deeply absorb that the peace you seek is not outside you. It's not in changing others, in making them acknowledge your worth, in making the world kinder. The peace you seek resides in your decision not to let the world take you away from yourself. And that decision begins with a simple no. I will not respond right now. I will not explain what requires no explanation. I will not carry this burden that is not mine. I will not allow someone else's pain to turn my life into hell. This no is the beginning of a healing silence. But of course, it won't be easy, because the world will test the new you. There will be provocations. There will be criticisms. There will be injustices. But something inside you, something you are cultivating right now, will begin to grow. A new strength, a new axis, and then you will remember what you have read here, and you will smile. Perhaps, for the first time in a long time, you will choose not to react. And in that moment, something will happen that has never happened before. The other person will remain who they are, but you will no longer be lost in who they are. You will remain calm, present, unmoved, like a mountain. And then life will begin to change, because everything that used to hurt you can no longer touch you. Insults lose their power. Arguments lose their meaning. The crises of others are no longer yours, and your energy, previously spent on conflict, begins to be used for creation, for healing, for growth. You begin to listen more, to understand more, to speak less, to react less. You breathe deeper, you live lighter, and over time, you will notice that some people distance themselves from you. They won't be able to handle your new calm, but others, the ones who truly matter, will draw closer, because calm attracts calm. Carl Jung showed us that the path to self-knowledge passes through liberation from being held hostage by the emotions of others. And the first step on that path is the power of non-reaction. Are you ready to take that step? Then prepare yourself, because in the next parts of this video we will delve even deeper. We will explore the teachings of Kukai, stories carrying 1,000 years of wisdom, and practical techniques that you can apply in your life. We will show you how to become unshakable, how to be peace even in chaos, how to stop being a spectator of your own soul and start being its author. But it all starts here, now, with this first silence. Breathe. Don't react. Observe. You have just opened a door. What comes next may change your life forever. How often have you asked yourself why it feels like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders? Why, even trying to be understanding, kind, and attentive, do you still feel emotionally drained? Why does it seem like you're always on the edge, as if something small is enough to make you crumble from the inside? If you are between 30 and 65 years old, if you live with an open heart, if you feel everything deeply and are rarely understood, then this moment is for you. You have come to this point because you intuitively feel that there is another way to live, a way in which the soul doesn't suffer from every conflict, when you no longer need to react as if you are in a field, open to someone else's chaos. And now, let's continue this journey with a story that is not simply symbolic. It's real in the deepest sense of the word, because it could be yours. Once upon a time, there was a woman named Elisa. At 42, her face bore the marks of someone who had cried much in silence. She was a teacher, a mother of two, and possessed an extraordinarily sensitive soul. Elisa was not weak, far from it, but she was deep. She experienced everything intensely, from dismissive looks at work to veiled criticism from relatives. She knew that, for the superficial world, she was not an easy person. But what hurt her the most was the constant feeling of being at war with the outside world. At school, colleagues complained about her excessive emotionality. At home, her teenage children coldly rejected any attempts at dialogue. On social media, a single harsh comment was enough to make her feel struck by an invisible spear. And so, like many people of the same age with such sensitivity, Elisa learned to be silent, but not out of wisdom, but out of weariness. However, being silent unconsciously is not the same as practicing a healing inner silence. And one night, when she couldn't fall asleep and was exhausted, she came across a video about the power of non-reaction. A phrase, spoken in a firm and calm voice, echoed in her head. When you don't react, you regain power over your soul. It deeply touched her. She began to observe how many times a day she reacted without thinking. Someone ignored her in the hallway. Her chest tightened. A student complained. She blamed herself. Her mother hinted that she wasn't taking good care of her children. She cried, hiding in the bathroom. Insignificant reactions, enormous internal wounds. And then, one day, during a school meeting, hearing inappropriate criticism directed at her, Elisa simply sighed. She said nothing. She didn't justify herself. She simply allowed herself to feel and let go, not like someone who swallows resentment, but like someone who allows a bird to fly away without trying to catch it. For the first time, she wasn't carried away. She remained. This simple scene became the first step in a transformation that changed not only her routine, but her way of life. Perhaps you too are in such a situation, when your sensitivity has become a burden, and the world around you has no idea of the struggle you wage to remain yourself in an environment that demands daily hardening of character. Perhaps you have a heart like Elisa's, or like the hearts of millions of people who live in silence, drowned in reactions they can barely contain. Carl Jung said that much of our suffering comes from an inability to restrain our impulses. And he wasn't just talking about visible impulses, like shouting or exploding with emotion. He meant that subtle agitation that corrodes from within. Resentment, anguish, thoughts, open wounds that never heal because the world doesn't stop touching them. That's why the power of non-reaction is a revolutionary gesture, because it doesn't deny the pain, it redirects it. It teaches that not everything deserves a response, not every provocation deserves attention, and that your peace is more valuable than winning an argument. Of course, it's difficult, because our minds have been trained to defend, attack, be proud, and even more so for those who have already experienced betrayal, criticism, repeated rejection. Naturally, the tendency is to react. But the absence of reaction is not the absence of protection. It's the absolute presence of consciousness. Imagine that someone has offended you for no reason. In 2025, this might happen because of a curt message, a misinterpreted emoji, a digital insinuation. Technology has perfected insults, but their impact is still brutal for those who feel everything with their heart. And so, you stand before a choice, to react and lose a night's sleep, or to sigh and choose peace. But you will only be able to do this consistently by developing this internal muscle, because the absence of reaction is not a magic button. It's a practice, a daily choice. That's why self-knowledge is so important in this process. Jung spoke of it. To know yourself is the only way not to be subjugated by others. And here we come to a key point. Many of us consider ourselves too vulnerable. But the truth is, we aren't vulnerable. We are unprotected. When you don't know yourself, anyone can access your most vulnerable places. They can manipulate your guilt. They can trigger your fears. They can dictate the rhythm of your emotions. But when you delve into yourself, when you begin to take care of your internal structure, when you learn to listen to your soul before responding to the world, then you begin to protect yourself without building walls. You protect yourself with your presence, with your insight, with your emotional maturity. And it is in this method of Jung that we find a compass, because he was not only a theorist, he was a cartographer of the soul, a man who mapped the paths between the unconscious and awakening. And therefore, if this content has been helpful to you so far, I want to recommend something special to you. There is material that deepens all this in a practical and everyday way. It's an ebook, Jung's LUD Method, 5 minutes a day for inner peace and clarity of mind. It was created specifically for people like you, who feel too much, think too much, and need a simple, profound, and accessible way to cultivate this new state of presence. In just 5 minutes a day, you will learn to mute the external noise and reconnect with what truly matters. This ebook is more than just reading. It's an encounter with yourself. If you want to take that next step, it's available in the pinned comment of this video. Because ultimately, it's not about changing the world. It's about changing how you live in it. With ease, with firmness, with tranquility. and with the awareness that your peace is worth more than any fleeting reaction. Have you ever wondered if often the greatest wear and tear in your life comes not from what happens, but from how you react to what happens? At first glance, this seems obvious, but perhaps it's the most overlooked aspect of our emotional well-being. It isn't the facts themselves that exhaust us. It's the invisible chain of thoughts, emotions, and impulses that ignites within you like a fire, always waiting for a spark. And that spark almost always comes from the mouth of another person. Criticism at work, an unfortunate comment at the dinner table, an unanswered message, a compliment given to someone else, not you. All these seem like small things, but depending on the state of your soul, they can turn into a storm. Have you ever noticed this? As if the world has direct access to your internal buttons. And the most curious or frightening thing is that most people give away this control without realizing it. They react automatically, like emotional puppets. Someone speaks loudly, you answer louder. Someone is sarcastic, you shrink or retaliate. Someone ignores you, you feel invisible. But what if you no longer needed to behave this way? What if there were a way to live so that your inner peace was not a reflection of others, but a firm and constant choice, like a flame that doesn't go out with the wind? In this part of the video, I want to propose that you conduct a quiet and perhaps transformative experiment. I want you to remember now the last time you got angry with someone. Immerse yourself in that memory. Recall what was said, how you felt, what you thought, how you reacted. And now answer honestly. If you had remained silent, what would have happened? This simple but powerful question can reveal painful truths. Most storms end where they should never have begun, inside us. It is there that wear and tear is born, and it is there that we must learn to intervene. Carl Jung warned us, the external world is a reflection of what has not yet been understood in the internal world. We react on the outside because on the inside we are at war. Therefore, the path is not in controlling others, but in mastering your internal world. But how to do this in a world where everything seems to be a trigger? The answer lies in the art of not reacting, not in passivity, but in active wisdom. Wisdom that observes before acting, that breathes before speaking, that acknowledges its feelings, but doesn't allow them to carry it away. And here arises an important point that is almost always overlooked. The absence of reaction is actually a response, one of the most powerful that exists, because it breaks cycles. It destroys emotional traps. It demonstrates maturity. And more than that, it conserves your energy. Have you ever wondered how much energy you spend on justifying, on explaining, on objecting, on trying to prove that you are right, that you are good, that you are fair, that you are good enough? This constant striving, while draining, exhausts us. And strangely enough, the more we react, the less we are noticed, because we cease to be an essence and become noise. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine that you are that rare type of person who remains focused in chaos, who remains whole in the face of provocation, who remains silent in the face of condemnation, not out of fear, but out of strength. Do you know someone like that? A grandfather, a wise person, a woman who has lived a long life and has learned to be silent when everyone around is shouting. Write in the comments if you have had such an example in your life. By sharing this, you can touch other people who are watching this video, and it could be the beginning of a collective healing. Those people who radiate calm weren't born that way. They trained that silence. They were hurt many times. They broke down inside. But one day, they realized that the real power is not in winning arguments, but in not needing them. There is an Eastern story that perfectly illustrates this. Once, a Buddhist monk was insulted by a man who said he hated his words and his presence. The monk was silent. The man, enraged, shouted even louder, "You are a coward. Why don't you answer?" The monk looked him in the eyes and said, "If someone offers you a gift, but you refuse to accept it, to whom does that gift then belong?" The man hesitated and replied, "I think to the one who tried to give it." The monk concluded, "Then the same is true with your insults. I refuse them. They remain yours." This in itself is already liberating, but I want you to realize what power is contained in this position. It is not pride. It is power. It is self-control. It is profound emotional intelligence. And above all, it is protection. Because the world is becoming increasingly noisy. People are constantly reacting. Just open any social network to see. Comments turn into war. Videos become a matter of dispute. A mistake leads to cancellation. We are all ready to attack, and at the same time, exhausted. Therefore, the absence of reaction is not an escape. It is resistance. It is self-care. It is when you say to yourself, "My peace is not for sale. My inner well-being is not an item of trade. I will not react because I have already understood that the other is talking about themselves. They are not talking about me." And perhaps this will be one of the greatest revolutions you can make for yourself in 2025, not to become part of the noise. But here's what can be a little painful. Are you really willing to give up the need to be right? Are you willing not to answer a passive-aggressive message? Not to respond to a hint? To smile to yourself when you are underestimated? Because the ego will scream. It will demand a reaction. It will demand revenge. It will want justice. But you will need to choose ego or peace. And if you have the courage to choose peace, then you will begin to notice something even more surprising. Often, when you don't react, others reveal themselves completely. The one who tries to provoke you and cannot shows his weakness. The one who tries to manipulate you and doesn't succeed shows his true intentions. The one who expected your anger and met calm is lost. And it is in this confusion that deep truths emerge. The absence of reaction is like a mirror that shows the other and shows you. Therefore, I invite you to share in the comments a moment when you decided not to react and understood that it changed everything. Your story can inspire other people and can be the beginning of a quiet stream of change. Because silence is also a language, one of the most powerful. And the one who knows how to use silence knows where his power lies. And if you believe that you do not yet possess this power, don't worry. It can be developed day by day, choice by choice, an extra breath before speaking, a quiet no in response to an invitation to exploit, a pause before giving in to an impulse. It is in that space between stimulus and reaction that your freedom lives, and it is in that space that you gradually re-emerge, lighter, more whole, more yourself. There is an invisible force that subtly influences most of the decisions you make every day. It influences what you wear, what you say, what you hide, what you pretend, what you endure, and even who you choose to be in each situation. This force has a gentle name, but a cruel impact. The opinions of others. It seems insignificant, perhaps, but let's take a closer look. According to a study by the American Psychological Association, more than 70% of adults report having made important decisions based on fear of public condemnation, rather than on their true desires. This means that out of every 10 people you know, 7 may be living a life they didn't really choose. And you? How many of your decisions were made only to avoid rejection? The problem is not caring. The problem is not losing yourself. And perhaps no one spoke about this as deeply as Carl Jung. In his opinion, the greatest danger for a person is departing from their essence in search of belonging. Jung called this betraying the soul, and said that when this happens again and again, a specific symptom appears: causeless fatigue. Have you ever experienced such fatigue? Non-physical, the kind that doesn't go away after sleep, the kind that doesn't disappear on weekends. It's a fatigue that seems to come from the soul, a vague feeling of heaviness, a sensation that you are always wearing clothes that don't belong to you. If this sounds familiar, take a deep breath, because this is not weakness. It's a signal, a call to return. Jung argued that a person must develop what he called an internal center. It's a kind of psychic root that allows a person to be firm as bamboo, flexible on the outside, uncrushable on the inside. But what happens to those who don't have this center? They live drifting with the current. They adapt their voice to the environment. They exchange authenticity for acceptance. They pretend to agree to avoid conflict. They work in jobs they don't believe in, but don't have the courage to change. They laugh without wanting to. They cry in silence. And over time, they become ill. And this illness doesn't always manifest as clinical diagnoses. Sometimes it manifests as insomnia, constant irritability, memory lapses, chronic anxiety, difficulty in making decisions, a feeling that you no longer know who you are. Perhaps right now you are thinking about yourself, or about someone you love, and that's why we need to talk about what it means to have an internal anchor. Because deep down, that's what everyone is looking for, something that can't be shaken. And if you are still reacting to everything, If you are still easily losing your balance, perhaps what you lack is not strength, but roots. And how to create roots? With presence, with truth, with conscious choices. But first, it is necessary to have the courage to admit that you have lived to please others. Be honest. How many times just in the last month have you said yes when you wanted to say no? How many times have you ignored your intuition because you didn't want to seem like a difficult person? How many times have you not voiced your opinion so as not to bother others? And what happened after that? Did you feel relief of a kind? Or did you feel the bitter aftertaste of self-deception? A Stanford University study showed that people who constantly suppress their truth, on average, produce 40% more cortisol, the stress hormone, than those who practice authenticity. This is not only a psychological, but a physical process. The body feels when you renounce yourself, and the soul, it cries in silence. But it doesn't have to be this way. You can return to yourself, and the path begins with building what Jung called an integrated personality, an emotional structure that does not depend on the approval of others to exist, that knows what it values, that clearly understands what can be discussed and what cannot. A person with an internal anchor is not stubborn. They are balanced. They listen, but do not obey. They are kind, but do not indulge. They love, but do not lose themselves. They know that life in society requires flexibility, but never at the expense of their own essence. And why is this so rare? Because it requires effort. It requires solitude. It requires renouncing approval. It assumes a quiet confidence that is not built in a day. But it all starts with something simple, knowing what is important to you. Seems simple, doesn't it? But many people, reaching 40, 50, 60 years old, still cannot clearly answer this question. They know what others expect of them. They know what is well received. They know what causes admiration. But what is really important, they have forgotten. Here's an exercise. Stop for a moment and ask yourself, what do I deeply value, even if no one applauds? If you want, share your answer in the comments. This kind of reflection can trigger conversations that touch other souls and create connections that go beyond the superficial. And now imagine that you live a life that corresponds to that answer. Imagine that you wake up and know that, regardless of what others say, you act in accordance with your values. Imagine that you make choices that reflect your soul, not the fear of being rejected. Imagine that you are you, without veils. That is the internal anchor, and it changes everything. With it, you begin to understand that many of the offenses that used to sting you no longer find a place, that emotional games lose their influence, that silence ceases to be emptiness and becomes peace, that you stop explaining yourself and simply exist. You become a presence, a weight of truth. And curiously, that is when the most disturbed people begin to distance themselves from you. They feel your stability as a threat, and that's normal. Let them go, because others will draw closer. People who vibrate on the same frequency, who don't want to change you, but want you whole. Carl Jung said that loneliness doesn't come from being alone, but from not being able to express what is important to you. Therefore, when you begin to live with an anchor, you may lose some relationships, but you gain something much more valuable, internal coherence. And coherence is a kind of freedom that no one can take away from you. Perhaps, right now, you are in a phase where everything seems fragile, as if you no longer know what you want, as if you are trying to please everyone, and in the end, not even pleasing yourself. If that is the case, breathe. It's okay. It's just a sign that it's time to go back home. And home, in your case, is that center that you have ignored, that quiet place inside you that knows, and has always known, who you are. You don't need to reinvent yourself to feel worthy. You simply need to remember. And when that remembrance comes, everything will change. The absence of reaction will cease to be an effort and become a reflex, because you no longer need to defend an image. You have become an essence, and essence doesn't shout. It doesn't justify itself. It doesn't argue. It simply is. And that being in the silence of someone who has roots is the loudest sound that the soul can make. Have you ever noticed that behind most of your emotional reactions, there is a quiet urgency, a need to decide, to answer, to fix, to defend, to prove, as if something inside you is shouting, I can't miss this. I have to react now. But what if that impulse is not really yours? What if it's just a reflection of a conditioning that you have been repeating for decades without even noticing it? So far, we have talked about the art of not reacting, about how silence can be a shield, a language, and a mirror. We have talked about the burden of living for others and the liberation that comes when you restore your internal axis. Now it's time to touch on the essence of the matter. Why? Knowing all this, do you still react? The answer is simple. Because inside you there is still a part that doesn't want to relinquish control. Yes, control. The illusion that if you react quickly, you will avoid the worst. That if you justify yourself, you will be understood. That if you respond in kind, you will recover your dignity. But in reality, what happens is that you wear yourself out. You lose yourself. You distance yourself even further from your peace. And perhaps this is the most difficult moment in this journey. To recognize that in many cases, reaction is a desperate attempt to control what is uncontrollable. It's the ego, afraid of disappearing. It's the wounded inner child, trying to protect itself as best it can. But here is the most liberating truth. You no longer need to react to protect yourself. You have grown. You have matured. Now you have the real possibility of choosing. And choice is a luxury that only conscious people possess. Most live on autopilot. You no longer need to live that way. Think about the last times you lost control of yourself. What were you trying to preserve? Your image? Your sense of justice? Your worth? Now look at it calmly. Maybe what you so wanted to preserve was actually asking to finally be released. How many times have you defended something that you no longer believed in? How many times have you reacted impulsively and then felt guilt, shame, or regret? How many times have you tried to protect your dignity and ended up hurting someone you love? Carl Jung said that the soul becomes whole only when the truth is looked at in the face with courage. And the truth in this case is harsh. Many of our reactions are only a repetition of what was once a defense, but today has become a prison. And you don't need to continue remaining in captivity. In fact, the more you try to control everything, the less freedom you have. Control is a trap, a chain disguised as security. And the absence of reaction is a sacred pause. It's precisely that moment when you drop the shield. And instead of falling, you discover that you are floating. But how? How to trust that emptiness? How to believe that by not reacting, you are not losing territory, but gaining internal space? Here, surrender enters the scene. And perhaps this is the word you least want to hear because it sounds like defeat, like passivity. But that's not the case. Surrender, in the deepest sense, means recognizing that your power is not in responding, but in being present. Not in dominating the other, but in being free within yourself. And this surrender occurs only when you stop fighting what you feel, when you stop reacting to discomfort, when finally you look at what is bothering you and say, I don't need to fix this right now. I can simply allow it to be. This simple phrase, I can simply allow it to be, possesses enormous power. It disarms the ego. It creates space for the soul to breathe. It allows what is more profound in you to take control. Because you see, not everything that hurts needs to be fixed. Not every discomfort requires a reaction. Not every conflict needs a winner. Sometimes all you need is to stop fueling the fire with the oxygen of your attention. Imagine a life in which you no longer feel obliged to answer every criticism, to refute every accusation, to explain every choice. Imagine a life with the ease of a person who no longer needs to convince anyone of anything. Because inside, you have already found peace. This is not a utopia. It's a state that can be built. And it begins with giving up the role of victim. Yes, because as long as you believe that others are the villains in your story, you will continue to react as someone who must defend themselves. But when you understand that your peace is independent of them, everything changes. You begin to act with emotional responsibility. And responsibility is not guilt, it's power. It's the awareness that even if the world is not fair, even if other people are toxic, how you choose to react always remains your choice. And here, perhaps, lies the most important twist in this scenario. The power of not reacting is, in essence, an act of radical responsibility for oneself. It's when you stop transferring your stability to other people, when you decide that you will no longer give control over your internal world to the words, moods, and behaviors of those who are not living your life. You begin to believe that peace is more valuable than pride, that silence is more valuable than the perfect answer, that time will show who is who, and that you no longer need to carry that knife on your shoulders. And gradually, your body begins to understand. Anxiety decreases, sleep improves, tension dissipates, because the soul finally begins to rest. And what was previously reactivity becomes presence. What was previously despair becomes clarity. What was previously pain becomes wisdom. And with this you close the cycle of automatic response, of emotional urgency, of quiet exhaustion, and you open a space for a new story, a story of tranquility. Life doesn't change because the world has changed. It changes because you have changed your attitude toward it. And now, with all this said, the inevitable question: what are you going to do with it? Are you going to continue reacting automatically, justifying your feelings, blaming others for your instability? Or are you going to consciously practice protective silence, the transforming pause, the healing non-reaction? If you feel that it's time to take that step, and not just understand it intellectually, but apply it in your real life, in your relationships, in your everyday existence, then pay attention to what comes next. In the next video, I will guide you through a practical, deep, and accessible step-by-step guide so that you can implement this new state of being. This guide will help you consistently implement everything we have talked about so far, so that not reacting ceases to be a concept and becomes your new way of existing. You have reached this moment. You have gone through deep layers of reflection. You have recognized old pains. You have identified hidden patterns that may have accompanied you for years. And now you stand before the most important moment of this journey: to transform knowledge into a path, to transform consciousness into action, not just to understand, but to live. The question that echoes at this moment is simple, but powerful: how to turn the power of non-reaction into a new state of being. The answer will not come from outside. It will be born from your commitment, a commitment to your silence, to your stability, to your peace. At this moment, you may be experiencing a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Where to begin, your mind might ask. Therefore, I want to offer you a practical, strategic, emotional, and spiritually aligned plan. A map, a ritual, a process for transitioning from your previous way of reacting to the new path of presence and self-control that you want to live. And no, this plan does not require perfection. It requires presence and repetition. Below are 5 essential steps designed to help you deeply absorb the power of non-reaction, transforming it into a daily behavior, a strength of soul, and true emotional freedom. First, the ritual of the intermediate breath, the science of inner space. Starting today, before any verbal, emotional, or written reaction, you will take 3 conscious breaths, regardless of where you are: in a line at the bank, during a difficult phone call, in a correspondence that triggers you. You will interrupt the automatic flow of thoughts with 3 slow, conscious, and deep cycles of breathing. These 3 breaths are a portal, a crack in time where reactivity dissolves and presence appears. Do not underestimate this. Research from Harvard Medical School shows that a single conscious breath reduces the activity of the amygdala, the center of fear and reaction in the brain, by up to 40% in less than 10 seconds. The simple act of breathing can interrupt decades of conditioned reflexes. 2.